Hey guys, it's Miss J and I'm going to be going over your week 6 review with you all. So to go back and review, we're still looking at the Constitution and the government functions that it set up. So just to review again, the Constitution establishes how the United States government is going to be set up. So looking at it, Article 1 establishes the legislative branch. Article 2 is the executive branch. Article 3 is the judicial branch. And Article 4 is the relationship among states. And Article 5 is the Supremacy Clause. I know that this is something that we've been going over a lot each week in class. However, it's really important because each week we're building off of it and understanding it a little bit more. So I wanted to make sure we went over how the Constitution is able, or the setup of the Constitution, to understand how it gives each area of government its power. Because starting off, we're looking at federalism. That was the big theme for this week. So federalism is the division of government power. So in the United States, it is split between the federal, state, and the local governments. So when we're looking at it, I include this little infographic because when it was set up, it was kind of set up like a layered cake. You know, each authority clearly has its own set of rules and regulations. So the federal government has its own rules, state government has its own rules, and local government has its own rules. Well, as time has gone on, federalism has allowed the government systems to kind of evolve and change, which is good. So we get to the present day where it looks kind of like a marble cake, and that's because while you can still see the different things going into it, like the chocolate and the vanilla, which would be the different levels of government, there's also some swirling going on. And we understand that when we get into the powers a little bit more. So while the federal government and the state and the local governments still have its own rules and jobs, there are some things that can kind of be traded amongst the powers as well. So we'll get into that as well. So starting off, we'll look at some of those powers that each branch or each level of government has. So starting at the federal government, they have coining money, which is making and distributing money, declaring war, interstate commerce, and so that's different than intrastate commerce. Interstate with an E right here, that has to do with trade between states. So that would be trade between like Ohio and Kentucky, or Ohio and Maine. It's when things travel amongst the states. They also are in charge of foreign affairs and establishing an inferior courts and the process of naturalization. So naturalization is the process of becoming an American citizen. So of course that would be a federal role because you're an American citizen to all the states. So that would be one. The state governments are in charge of education, conducting elections, so that's why you vote within your state. So even for the federal election, the state is still going to conduct that election. And then maintaining their militia, ratifying the constitutional amendments. So if you remember, the second step of amending the Constitution was ratifying, which is where the states come and say, we approve, we voted yes. So that the states are in charge of ratifying constitutional amendments. And then lastly, they are in charge of intrastate commerce, so that's with an A. So that has to do with trade inside the state. So that would be trade between like Cincinnati, Ohio, and Columbus, Ohio. It's just trade that's going on inside your state. And then things that both kind of come in, or that both have power over, so that's kind of where you get that swirl effect if you think back to the last cake. Both levels of government are in charge of taxation. They're both in charge of lawmaking. If you think about there's federal laws and there's state laws. They're also in charge of law enforcement. So you've got the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but you've also got your local and state police departments. So both are in charge of law enforcement. And then they both can charter banks. So this week you had a lot of terms that go along with federalism. So I wanted to break those down and go over them with you. So first off, you've got the powers. So you have delegated powers, express powers, implied powers, reserved powers, and concurrent powers. So starting off, delegated powers. So those are powers given to the national government in the Constitution. So those are explicitly stated. And then those kind of go along with express powers. So the Constitution states in it that the federal government is going to have this specific power. If you think back to the first 3 articles of the articles, it goes over the powers that the legislative branch has, the judicial branch has, and the executive branch has. So those were expressed directly in the Constitution. Then you've got implied powers. So these are powers that are not explicitly listed in the Constitution, however they come from expressed powers. And so your textbook talked about how while the federal government can declare war, going along with that, an implied power would be that they are the ones that can control the draft. The Constitution doesn't say who can control the draft, but it would make sense considering that the federal government has the power to go to war. So implied powers are ones not explicitly stated, remember, but they go along with expressed powers. Next is reserved powers. So these are powers that are not specifically given to any government. It doesn't list them in the Constitution. However, this means that they can fall within the state government's rights. So they're saying that if the federal government was not specifically given the power to do something, then it would fall back to the state. So reserve powers are ones that are not given to the federal government, so it goes down to the state governments. And then concurrent powers, so these are the powers that are given to both the national and state government. So if we looked back, that would be taxation and law enforcement. So it's just ones that both share. So then we can look at the Supremacy Clause. So this states that if a law is passed by a state that conflicts with a law passed by the national government's law is going to be what is supreme. So that's where they get the word Supremacy Clause. The exact wording of it is the Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in the pursuance thereof, and all treaties made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Like I said, this just means that when in conflict, the national government is going to be supreme over the state government. And then we can get into federal grants and mandates. So grants. Grants are money that the federal government gives to states to be used in a variety of ways. So the money that the states receive from the federal government in grants can be used for a variety of different things. This can be used to improve roads or other things within the state. It's what some of the federal tax money, when you get taxed by the federal government, will go to. So this is so that there is more even distribution of money to richer states and poorer states, so that things can be improved in the poorer states if they don't have enough money from their own taxes to do so. And then we've got mandates. So these are requirements from the national government that they require the states to do. Now, the thing about mandates is they do not always need to be funded by the national government. So these are given out by Congress. Congress does not have to give money to do so. So there's federal regulations on what needs to be listed on foods. And in order for that to be changed, the federal government did not always give the states the money to change those. And then we looked at state relations. So it prevents each state from working as its own country. So that way you can kind of move between states, and there's unity among them. So for instance, if you think about it, if you get married in one state, you're married in all states. If you get your driver's license, you can drive here, and you can also drive across the river and drive in Kentucky as well. So that's just a way that the states can work together. However, the state relations do not give everyone equal access to everything in each state. So for instance, when you look at education, we get in-state tuition living in Ohio at Ohio universities. However, if I were to move to Florida, I would not get in-state tuition in Florida. So there is different things that can differentiate between citizens of each state, but overall it's to create unity among the states. So you guys were supposed to look at the term extradite. So this is if a criminal or fugitive flees to a new state, this state must return them to the state in which they committed a crime. So you guys can't go rob a store in Ohio and then just cross the river to Kentucky and be like, I'm in a new place, nobody can get me here. They'd have to return you to Ohio in order for you to be prosecuted in the legal system here. And then lastly, so this was the states' rights position and the nationalist position. So this is in regards to how federalism should be handled. So you can think about it this way. Who gives who power? So in the states' right position, they believe that the state should be the most powerful because the states give the national government power. And in the nationalist position, they believe that the people, not the states, give the national government power. So the national government must work in the interest of all of the people, not in the interests of the states. So again, it's just thinking about who gives who power and whether that resides with the states or with the national government. Thank you all. Remember, if you have any questions, to reach out to Mr. Flicker and I, and if you need anything, please let us know.